On the 2nd of June 1997, students from the senior year at Napa High School visited WATERWORLD USA in Concord, California. It was their end-of-year trip, and for many it was a significant milestone. The last time they would all be able to spend time together before moving on to college, work, and their adult lives. However, due to a prank gone wrong, the day would end up being significant for hundreds of people in an entirely different and deadly way. WATERWORLD USA opened for business in 1995 with a number of rides and attractions including Northern California's longest lazy river and the only large wave pool in the local area. Attractions were designed to provide entertainment for a wide range of guests, with shallow pools and play areas for children supplemented by larger, taller, and more extreme water slides for teens and adults. For several years, the park operated without major issues. Accidents of any kind were rare, and the attractions were kept in good working order, with new attractions and theming added every few years. The park gained a reputation as an excellent day out, especially when complemented by its nearby sister park, WaterWorld Sacramento, and the wildlife theme park, Marine World Africa USA. Locals could buy a season pass for all three attractions, which were owned and operated, at least until the late 1990s, by the same company. There was a great deal to recommend WaterWorld USA. And this was, perhaps, why in 1997 it was chosen as the location for the annual end-of-year trip for seniors from Napa High, a school about an hour north of the park. Every year, graduating students would enjoy a class trip, and it was almost always to a water park. In previous years, they had visited Manteca water slides, but in 1997, it was decided that this year the trip would be to WaterWorld USA instead. Over the course of many successive end-of-year trips, a tradition had arisen among the students. Towards the end of the day, when the risk of getting kicked out of the park was minimal, they would all gather at one of the largest water slides available and attempt to slide down together. To do this, one student would enter the slide, but quickly brace themselves against the sides and bring themselves to a stop, blocking the slide. This would allow their friends to enter the slide behind them and catch up with them. More and more students would enter the slide, until those at the front let go and the entire group would slide down together. The end result would be a chaotic, exhilarating ride, surrounded by friends, and with a massive splash at the end. Napa High students called this practice clogging, and by 1997 it had become a slightly competitive tradition. Each class of senior students would try to clog a slide with more people than the previous one had, with the record in 1996 set at Manteca water slides, being over 60 students on a single slide at once. Teachers and chaperones were aware of this tradition, and although they didn't necessarily approve, they also made students aware that they wouldn't be punished for it. It was viewed as a prank, against the rules, but essentially harmless fun. Adults supervising the end-of-year trip would rather tolerate it than ruin the excursion by trying to forbid it. The 2nd of June 1997 was a relatively quiet day at WaterWorld USA, but the weather was warm and pleasant, and students of Napa High enjoyed an excellent day of fun and relaxation with their friends. Throughout the day there was some discussion of clogging a slide, but it was generally accepted that this would be done at the very end of the school's time in the park, to minimize the risk that anyone would be kicked out. Thus, when an announcement was made at around 2:30 p.m. asking Napa High students to begin returning to their buses, dozens of them instead headed for the Banzai Pipeline Slide Complex. This 40-meter or 131-foot tall tower was fitted with 4 slides of varying intensity. Lifeguards were situated at the top of the tower to supervise riders as they entered the slides. Several students pushed past one lifeguard and entered a slide together, before quickly arresting their descent by bracing themselves against the sides of the fiberglass chute. Their friends followed, piling up behind them. It was at first a joyful, celebratory activity. These were friends who had studied together for years. They were ecstatic to be taking part in one final, glorious prank before the end. More students piled on, pushing past the lifeguard at the top of the tower. The lifeguard blew their whistle and shouted at the students not to block the slide, telling them it was unsafe to do so. The students ignored this warning, prompting the lifeguard to pick up their radio and begin making a call to park security. Once around 30 people had entered the slide, There was a loud cracking sound. The fiberglass of the slide tore. Bolts that secured it to the supports pulled through the tear, and a whole section of the slide, the most heavily loaded section of the slide, fell open like a trapdoor. Dozens of students tumbled to the ground below, falling onto bare concrete or into flower beds. Some of them impacted the supports of the slide on the way down. Some were able to hold on for a brief few seconds before they too fell. Student Alinda Franco survived the fall and later gave this account of the accident. The sound of fiberglass cracking is ingrained in my mind forever. I remember starting to fall and trying to grab onto something. It was like the platform was just an arm's length away, but I couldn't reach it. As soon as I felt myself starting to fall, my brain shut off. The ground below was instantly littered with injured teenagers. Blood contaminated the splash pool of the ride as park staff descended on the area. The number of casualties and the multiple injuries suffered by each casualty were overwhelming. Emergency services were called, and a steady flow of ambulances began ferrying 32 injured teens to local hospitals. There were so many that no one facility could accommodate them all, and some students had to be taken further afield. The principal of Napa High, Lars Christensen, was informed and immediately drove to the park. He arrived to find the road blocked, with access only available to emergency vehicles. He was forced to leave his car on the side of a nearby highway and run the rest of the way to the park. Once there, he was shocked to see that there were so many casualties that students were still awaiting transport to hospital even an hour after the accident. He was shocked still further when police officers on scene asked him to identify a body. 18-year-old Quimby Gilotti had sustained injuries to her head and chest from the fall and did not recover. She had been a consistent honors student and had recently been awarded a college scholarship to study psychology. In the weeks before the trip, she had expressed to friends and family that she did not feel ready to leave high school. Now, she never would. In the aftermath of the accident, an investigation was launched. There was some speculation that the construction of the slide had been faulty, but it was ultimately found that the attraction was safe when used as intended. It was built to be ridden by one person at a time, but was designed with tolerances such that it could hold the weight of 10 people if necessary. With more than 30 students crammed onto the slide at once, however, it had been pushed past its limits and had broken. The senior class of Napa High had felt safe in pursuing the tradition of clogging, as they had done so without incident in previous years. However, in previous years, the class trip had been to Manteca water slides, a park where many of the slides were built into the sides of hills and thus would not collapse under any circumstances. Despite not being found at fault, WATERWORLD USA paid out around $4 million in settlements to end legal proceedings against the park. The Banzai pipeline slide complex remained closed for almost a year before being rebuilt, rebranded, and reopened. The 1997 senior class of Napa High went ahead with its graduation ceremony as planned, even though many students in attendance were seriously injured. Students who had fallen from the water slide attended as best they were able, some in wheelchairs, many with casts and mobility aids, assisted by healthcare professionals. Almost all of the injured students were ultimately able to attend, and the ceremony was, for all of them, a sober but moving way to end their time at high school and move on to their adult lives. Many survivors were left with injuries that never fully healed, or which took years or decades to recover from. For Quimby Gilotti, and for every student in that year, a momentary decision, a fun and light-hearted prank gone wrong, had consequences that would last a lifetime